All right, so this is for seniors, especially regarding the last 2 days of class, the 27th and the 28th, where we are really diving into the last thing we're doing in class this year. And that is we are working with our poetry portfolio. So every poem we have written this quarter and last quarter exists on one Google Doc that you've turned in, you've shared, we've graded most of those poems, and we are editing and revising those poems. So we're doing this in a very specific way. So let's kind of walk through it together because I know we've had a lot of questions. So I'm going to open up modules. Probably the easiest one to go to is today, and you can see these are labeled, right? So if you need to go back and find them, here you go, edit and revision, begin poetry revision. I'm going to click on the Canvas page for today. I'm going to scroll down a little bit until I get to this checklist. This checklist just reminds you all the poems we've written this quarter and shows you how to make a poetry portfolio, reminds you to grab the poems from last quarter, and that you should also grab your theme and your imitation poems that you wrote for parts 4 and 5 for your poet study. Then what you need to do, and what I've done for most people that were in class on Friday, I believe everyone that was in class on Friday, is copy and paste this whole thing into your portfolio. So you're going to copy and paste everything in this box into your portfolio. And what's in this box are 16 suggested ways that you can edit and revise your poems. So let's see. Looks like I'm looking into the camera. So if I have a poem, and let's say it's a poem I wrote for Mother's Day, I will copy and paste my original poem. So the poem I wrote, the like for you poem kind of thing, I would copy and paste that here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose 3 of these 16 options, and I'm going to try that out with the poem. So maybe my Mother's Day poem kind of had a boring last line. I'm going to go back, I'm going to spice it up a little bit. I'm going to write a better last line. Maybe I was just really vague. Maybe I was like, oh, I love you. You're the best. You mean everything to me. And maybe like there's nothing really there to latch onto visually. So maybe I'm going to describe it. I'm going to say, Mom, your blue crystal eyes remind me of the first frost on a Christmas morning. You can really dive into some physical details, describe it, whatever you want to do. And then maybe you'll switch it up, and maybe you'll add some dialogue, right? You'll maybe add a blip of a conversation you had together, last year. Maybe you had a conversation that meant a lot, and you'll kind of weave in parts of dialogue, whatever you want to do. You'll add 3 of these revision techniques to that poem, and then you'll have your edited poem right below your original. And these could be any of the poems you've written this quarter or last quarter for class. And then finally, is you'll just do a quick write-up, so kind of like a short paragraph about your revision, identifying what you've changed. So you're going to tell me which of the 3 things you've changed. And then you're going to identify what effect that had on the poem, right? What did dialogue add to your poem? What did specifying an abstract do to your poem? What did changing the perspective do to your poem, right? And this is just your interpretation of that. If you need to see an example of what that looks like, conveniently, we have an example right here. You'll go through, you can see here are the poems I've written. Every time I assigned you a poem, I also wrote the poem. And then I'll just scroll down to the bottom, and I kind of labeled mine so I can keep track of it. You'll see it down here, close to page 10, I believe. Part 2 revisions, right? And then here's a poem I wrote. Here's the revised version of that same poem. And then down here, I tell you what I revise. In this case, I have this poem. I have it in the third person. I say he. In the second one, I say I. Okay, so there's one of our changes right here. Another change, you'll notice here, there's no dialogue. Here, I add some dialogue, right? Some people talking. And so that's my second thing. My third is I wrote it backwards. This one right here. So I started out just by taking this last line and I flipped it and I wrote it backwards, and then all of those things combined make a new poem. And I talk about that and the effect that I think each of those changes made on the poem. I have a write-up down here. So that's what you're doing for your poetry revision. At this point in the quarter, and depending on what you've done so far, if your goal is just to pass senior English and you're okay with a C, it's my recommendation that you just pick one thing to do. So you're either going to finish up your poet study, right, where you're doing your PowerPoint, your Google slideshow about Carolyn Forche, E.E. Cummings, or Sonia Sanchez. If you've already done that and you just want to see, do that really well, and then you're good to go for the year. If maybe you started too late for the poet study to really get invested, it's just not been something you've been able to do, but you've written some poems and you are interested in working on the poems, do the poems. Forget about the poet study for now, but invest in these revisions. You're choosing 3 of your poems, you are revising them, they should be substantial, and then you are writing up, your little paragraph for each of the 3 poems, telling me what you've changed. And once you've done that, you're good for the year. So there really shouldn't be, it's my hope that between these 2 options for getting through senior English, everyone should be able to. I'm trying to think of other circumstances, like if you just really haven't started anything, go back. At this point, probably the poetry portfolio would be a little quicker, as long as you're okay writing a couple of poems. If you have done the poetry portfolio or the poet study last quarter, you're doing the exact same thing this time again. If you've already completed the study and you're doing the poetry portfolio now, then you're putting yourself right in range to get an A for the quarter, to get a B for the quarter, and most likely for the year. So I hope this